I showed up at my old house with a calm voice and a list of the items that belonged to me, only to have my former roommate shove the door half closed and tell me I was obsessed. Her new boyfriend stood behind her like a guard, smirking while my air fryer, lamp and storage bins sat visibly in the living room. When I said I just wanted my things, she snapped that I was not stepping inside her place ever again. The moment felt surreal, like I was being treated as a stranger in a home I lived in for 2 years. I could see my own bookshelf through the doorway, the one I bought during our first month living together. My coffee maker sat on the counter behind them, the exact model I researched for weeks before purchasing. I pointed at it, trying to stay reasonable, but she rolled her eyes and slammed the door in my face. Standing on the porch, I felt my hands shake with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was not how friendships were supposed to end. This was not how adults resolved simple problems. I left frustrated, replaying the scene in my car, wondering how things even reached this point in our relationship. She asked me to move out temporarily because she needed space when her boyfriend moved in last spring. I agreed without much thought, thinking it was temporary and we would sort things out once they settled into their routine together. Instead, she slowly stopped responding to my texts altogether, leaving my messages on read for days at a time. At first, I convinced myself she was just busy adjusting to her new living situation with him. I gave her the benefit of the doubt for weeks, making excuses for her silence in my own mind. But as time passed, the silence grew heavier and more deliberate, more pointed and intentional. I started to realize that temporary was never the plan she actually had for me. She wanted me gone permanently, and she wanted to keep everything I left behind in the process. The betrayal stung more than I expected it would. I thought we were closer than this after 2 years of living together. The first real disrespect showed up online when I was scrolling through social media late one evening, photos of their new cozy setup, and in the background were my bookshelf and kitchen appliances arranged like they belonged there. Friends sent me screenshots throughout the week, asking if I sold her my stuff or if we made some kind of arrangement. I lied and said I was dealing with it privately, but the truth was I felt embarrassed and completely unsure how to confront her again after that door slam. Each post felt like a slap in the face, a public display of disrespect. She tagged the photos with captions about building a home and new beginnings, as if none of it was mine to begin with. People left comments praising her taste, her aesthetic choices, her eye for design and decoration. I wanted to scream at my phone that those were my choices, my purchases, my things that I spent months collecting. But I stayed silent, not wanting to start drama publicly or look petty to our mutual friends. I convinced myself that maybe she would come around and do the right thing eventually. I sent a polite message listing everything I wanted back and asked for a reasonable pickup time that worked for both of us. She replied hours later with a dismissive text. "Stop being dramatic, you barely used half that stuff anyway." The dismissal stung more than I expected, cutting deeper than the actual loss of the items. I never asked her for anything unreasonable during our entire time living together, and suddenly I was being painted as difficult and demanding. I read the message over and over, trying to understand how she could twist reality so easily in her favor. I used everything I bought, every single item on that list. The air fryer was mine because I was the one who wanted to cook healthier meals. The storage bins were mine because I needed them for my seasonal clothes and extra bedding. The lamp was mine because I picked it out specifically and paid for it with my own money. None of this was up for debate or interpretation. But she acted like my memory was faulty, like I was inventing ownership out of thin air to cause problems. When I tried calling her directly to discuss things like adults, she sent it straight to voicemail without even letting it ring twice. Another text came through minutes later. "I'm busy, stop harassing me or I'll block you completely." The word harassing hit me hard, making my chest tighten with frustration. I tried to stay civil through every interaction, but she was twisting it into something ugly and threatening. I stared at the screen, stunned by how quickly she escalated things from a simple property dispute to accusations of harassment. Asking for my own belongings was not harassment by any reasonable definition. Wanting to retrieve what I paid for was not unreasonable or aggressive behavior, but she framed it that way deliberately to make me look like the villain in this situation. I wondered if she was showing these messages to other people, building a case against me in their eyes before I could tell my side. The thought made my stomach turn with anxiety. I put my phone down and tried to breathe slowly, but the anger simmered just below the surface, ready to boil over. I started noticing she blocked me on some platforms but not others, just enough access to keep tabs on me and see what I was posting, but not enough to respond to my messages or have actual conversations. She was posting cooking videos using my pots and pans, filming herself making elaborate dinners. People commented on how aesthetic her kitchen looked, how organized and beautiful everything appeared. It was all my stuff displayed like props in her performance. Every piece of cookware in those videos belonged to me without question. I recognized the scratches on the handles, the specific brands, the exact models I researched before buying. She filmed herself making dinner with my equipment, and strangers praised her for her taste and style. The audacity was staggering, almost impressive in its boldness. I wanted to comment on every post, to expose the truth publicly and let everyone know she was using stolen property. But I knew that would only make me look unhinged and obsessive, proving her narrative right. So I watched in silence, taking screenshots of everything she posted. I did not know what I would do with them yet, but I needed proof that I was not imagining this. Living in my tiny sublet across town, I made do with borrowed utensils from my sister and a cheap lamp from a thrift store that barely provided enough light. Every missing item added to my daily irritation, especially knowing they were being shown off online for internet points and validation. I began to realize she never planned to return anything from the very start. My mornings felt off balance without my coffee maker and its familiar routine. Cooking felt frustrating and inefficient without proper pans that heated evenly. Even reading in bed felt different and uncomfortable without my good lamp that had adjustable brightness settings. These were small things individually, but they added up to a constant reminder of what was taken from me without my consent. I kept thinking about how she sat in that house every day, using my belongings as if they were always hers, while I struggled to replace them on a tight budget that barely covered rent. The injustice of it burned in my chest constantly. I was the one who paid, the one who chose each item carefully based on reviews and quality, and now I was the one suffering without them. A mutual friend mentioned casually over coffee that my ex-roommate said I abandoned my stuff when I moved out without warning. That was when I understood she was building a narrative to justify keeping everything and painting herself as reasonable. The betrayal felt slippery and calculated, more intentional than I initially realized. She was not just keeping my things, she was rewriting history to make herself the victim of my supposed carelessness. In her version of events, I left everything behind willingly, like I did not care about any of it or plan to come back. She painted me as careless and dramatic, someone who made a big deal out of nothing just to cause problems for her new relationship. The lie spread through our social circle before I even knew it existed, poisoning people against me. I realized she planned this from the beginning with disturbing clarity. She asked me to move out temporarily, kept my belongings intentionally, and then crafted a story that made her look reasonable and me look unstable. It was a calculated theft disguised as a misunderstanding between friends, and I fell for it completely because I trusted her. I messaged her again several days later, stating clearly and firmly that those items belonged to me and I needed them back by the end of the week, or I would take further action. Hours later, she responded with something that made my blood run cold. "Try showing up again and see what happens to you." The vague threat rattled me enough to step back and reconsider my approach carefully. I did not know if she was serious or just trying to scare me into giving up my claim, but the tone was menacing enough to make me pause and think about safety. Her boyfriend was always there now, standing behind her like hired muscle whenever I came by. I was not afraid of a physical confrontation exactly, but I also did not want to put myself in a situation where things could escalate dangerously beyond my control. The threat hung over me for days, coloring every decision I made. I kept replaying her words, trying to figure out if she would actually do something violent or if it was all bluster meant to intimidate me. Either way, the tactic worked perfectly. I stopped trying to visit the house, afraid of what might happen if I pushed too hard. A week passed with no progress whatsoever, just silence and avoidance on her end. I tried once more to pick up my belongings on a Saturday afternoon, hoping maybe she would be more reasonable with time to think. But her boyfriend answered the door instead and told me I was not allowed near the house anymore, that I was trespassing on private property. He smirked as he said it, like he was enjoying the power trip and the control he had over the situation. I left shaking with rage and humiliation, my whole body trembling. The dismissal felt personal, like he took genuine pleasure in blocking me from my own property and seeing me upset. I wanted to push past him, to demand entry and take what was mine by force, but I knew that would only end badly for me. He was bigger than me, more aggressive in his demeanor, and clearly willing to defend her ridiculous claim to my belongings. I walked back to my car slowly, my whole body trembling with frustration and a deep sense of humiliation. This was my stuff that I paid for with my own money. I had every right to take it back. But they treated me like a trespasser, like I was the one doing something wrong by asking. At this point I was running low on patience and basic necessities that made daily life functional and comfortable. I reached out to her sister, hoping she would be reasonable and help mediate the situation between us. Instead, I was told I was overreacting dramatically and making problems where there were none, creating conflict for no reason. It was amazing how fast a lie spread through an entire family network. Her sister lectured me about letting things go and moving on with my life, as if I was clinging to material possessions out of spite or jealousy of the new relationship. She made it sound like I was the petty one, the one causing unnecessary drama, instead of just accepting the loss and moving forward. I tried to explain calmly that these were my belongings, that I had receipts and proof of purchase for everything on my list. But she brushed it off dismissively, saying I must be misremembering who bought what after living together so long. She said her sister would never steal from anyone, that it was completely against her character and values. The gaslighting extended beyond just my ex-roommate now. It was a family effort, a united front against the truth that I knew with absolute certainty. The emotional weight hit hard one night when I tried cooking and realized I did not even have a proper pan to make a simple meal. Everything I once had was still sitting comfortably in that house being used by someone else. I broke down completely, not just from the stuff itself, but from feeling powerless and dismissed by everyone involved. I sat on the floor of my sublet, crying over a borrowed frying pan that did not heat evenly and burned everything I tried to cook. It was not about the pan itself or even the money. It was about the disrespect, the theft, the way she made me feel like I was crazy for wanting what was rightfully mine. I felt erased from our shared history, like my contributions to that home never mattered at all. 2 years of my life, my money, my effort, all of it dismissed as if it never existed in the first place. The sadness turned to anger, then back to sadness again in exhausting cycles. I was trapped in emotional patterns I could not escape, going in circles mentally. I felt weak for crying over household items, but it represented something bigger than cookware. I finally gathered all the receipts I could find, digital orders, email confirmations, bank statements, for all the bigger items on my list. Seeing it all compiled in one folder gave me my first sense of solid ground in weeks of chaos. I was not crazy or confused. I was not overreacting to a minor situation. I paid for every single piece with my own hard-earned money. The proof sat in front of me in black and white, undeniable and clear as day. I had the Amazon order confirmation for the air fryer with my name and payment method. I had the bank statement showing the charge for the bookshelf from a furniture store. I had the email receipt for the storage bins from a home goods website. Each document felt like a small victory, a piece of armor against her lies and manipulation. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I had real leverage and power. I was not imagining ownership or misremembering purchases from years ago. I had facts, and facts did not lie or change based on who was telling the story. The relief was overwhelming, like I could finally breathe deeply again after weeks of suffocation. I tried one last time to communicate reasonably, sending her a detailed message with the list and proof of purchase attached as images. Her reply came quickly and cold, more aggressive than before. "I don't care about your screenshots. You left it here. It's mine now. Stop contacting me." The entitlement was breathtaking, stunning in its boldness and complete disregard for reality. She did not even try to hide behind excuses anymore or pretend there was a misunderstanding. She just flat out claimed ownership based on nothing but physical possession and proximity. The audacity stunned me into silence for several minutes. She saw my proof, acknowledged it by responding, and dismissed it entirely as irrelevant to the situation. In her mind, the fact that my belongings were currently in her house meant they were hers by default. It was the logic of a thief, plain and simple, with no moral complexity. I stared at the message, feeling my anger sharpen into something colder and more focused than before. She thought she won because she had physical possession and I had moved out. She thought I would give up and move on eventually, accepting the loss. She was completely wrong about that. After a long talk with a close friend who worked in legal services, I was convinced to call the non-emergency police line, not to cause drama or get revenge, but simply to ask what my options were legally. I felt guilty even dialing the number, like I was escalating things unnecessarily over household items. But I needed clarity and direction from someone with authority. The phone rang twice before someone answered with a calm, professional voice. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, half expecting to be told this was a civil matter they could not help with directly. I braced myself for dismissal, for being told to take her to small claims court or just let it go and move on. But the officer on the line listened carefully to every detail, asking specific questions about timelines and what proof I had available. His tone was professional but curious, like he was piecing together a puzzle in his mind. I answered everything honestly, describing the receipts, the text messages, the blocked access to the house. He went quiet for a moment after I finished, and I held my breath waiting for his response. The silence felt heavy with possibility. The officer I spoke to listened patiently through my entire explanation, then asked the question that changed everything in my mind. "Do you have proof the items are yours?" When I said yes and described the documentation, he told me plainly and without hesitation that this was possession theft. I sat there stunned, unable to speak for several seconds. He sounded almost confused that no one told me sooner, like it was obvious to anyone with basic legal knowledge. He explained that keeping someone's property without permission, especially with documented ownership and repeated requests for return, was not a grey area at all. It was theft, plain and simple under the law. The word echoed in my mind, changing everything. Theft. Not a misunderstanding between former roommates, not a disagreement about who owned what. Theft. He said that blocking my access to my own belongings made it even clearer and more serious. He asked if I wanted to pursue it formally with charges or just retrieve the items with police assistance for safety. I could barely process the options he was giving me. For weeks, everyone in my life treated me like I was overreacting to a minor dispute. But here was an officer of the law telling me I was the victim of an actual crime. The validation was almost too much to handle emotionally. He explained carefully that asking for my property was not harassment by any legal definition, and blocking access to it, especially with proof of ownership, was legally a form of theft under state law. For the first time in months, I felt validated and heard by someone with authority. The fog of self-doubt started to lift from my mind, clearing away slowly. The officer was matter-of-fact about it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world and he could not understand the confusion. He told me that sending messages requesting my belongings back was not only acceptable, it was actually the right thing to do before involving authorities. He said her accusations of harassment were baseless and possibly an attempt to intimidate me into giving up my legal rights. He even mentioned that her threats could be considered obstruction or intimidation if I wanted to pursue that angle separately. I did not want to go that far with criminal charges. I just wanted my stuff back and this nightmare to end. But hearing him confirm that I was not the problem, that I was not crazy or petty or dramatic, felt like a massive weight lifting off my chest after months of pressure. I was not wrong about any of this. I was never wrong, and now I had proof. The officer offered to do a civil standby while I retrieved my belongings from the house with police supervision. Just hearing that option existed made my shoulders loosen with relief for the first time in weeks. I scheduled a time for the next afternoon, feeling equal parts nervous and relieved about the confrontation to come. A civil standby meant an officer would accompany me to the house to ensure everything stayed peaceful while I collected my property. It was not an arrest or a raid or anything dramatic. It was just supervision, a neutral presence to keep her from blocking me again or escalating things physically. The officer confirmed the time and gave me clear instructions on what to bring with me: my ID, my receipts and proof of purchase, my detailed list of items. He told me to stay calm no matter what she said, and let him handle any confrontation or argument that arose. I agreed readily, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief that it came to this. After weeks of being dismissed and gaslit by nearly everyone I knew, someone with actual authority was finally taking me seriously and treating this like the theft it was. Tomorrow, I would get my things back. Tomorrow, this entire nightmare would finally end. When we arrived at the house the next afternoon, she opened the door with the same smugness and superiority until she saw the officer standing beside me in uniform. Her expression cracked immediately, shifting from confident to panicked in seconds. She started stuttering excuses rapidly. "I thought they were hers to keep. She left them here. We were going to give them back eventually." The confidence she showed over text vanished completely the moment she faced real consequences for her actions. Her boyfriend stayed in the background, suddenly much less bold without the safety of a closed door between us and actual authority present. The officer introduced himself calmly and professionally, explaining exactly why we were there in simple terms. He asked her directly if she had any objection to me retrieving my property with proof of ownership. She fumbled for words, looking between me and the officer desperately. She looked at me with something between anger and panic, like she could not believe I actually followed through with involving police. I stayed quiet, letting the officer handle it exactly like he told me to earlier. Her excuses sounded hollow and desperate, each one contradicting the last one she gave. The officer did not argue with her or get drawn into debate. He just asked again calmly, could I collect my belongings, yes or no? She had no choice but to agree. The officer calmly asked her to show where my belongings were located in the house right now. Suddenly everything she claimed was hers over text was being carried toward the door by her embarrassed boyfriend. She was frantic, trying desperately to save face in front of the officer, insisting it was all a misunderstanding between friends. The boyfriend stayed mostly silent now, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I watched with satisfaction as they brought out my air fryer, my lamp, my storage bins one by one. Each item felt like a small victory, a piece of my life being returned. She kept talking nervously, trying to explain herself to the officer, but he was not interested in her justifications or excuses. He just wanted confirmation that these were the items on my list that I provided. I checked each one off carefully, my hands steady for the first time in weeks of anxiety. She hovered nearby anxiously, her face red with embarrassment and anger at being exposed. The boyfriend carried things without meeting anyone's eyes, suddenly just following orders instead of playing tough guy. The power dynamic shifted completely and obviously, and she knew it. She was not in control anymore of anything. The law was, and the law sided with me. We gathered the items piece by piece, checking them off the list systematically to make sure nothing was missed. Some things were scratched from use, a few were clearly used more heavily than before based on wear. I did not comment on the damage or condition, biting my tongue. I was just relieved to have them back in my possession again. The officer thanked both of us for cooperating peacefully, but her red face and rigid posture said everything about how she felt. She looked humiliated, caught in a lie she could not talk her way out of or spin differently. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly just exhaustion from the entire ordeal. This should not have been this hard or complicated. A simple conversation should have resolved this weeks ago like adults. Instead, it took police intervention and legal terms like possession theft to get my own belongings returned to me. As we loaded the last box carefully into my car, she stood in the doorway with arms crossed, glaring at me with pure hatred. I did not glare back or engage emotionally. I did not say anything cruel or triumphant. I just took my things and moved on, exactly like I tried to do peacefully from the very start. As we loaded the last box into my car carefully, she asked the officer nervously if I was in trouble for showing up before without calling ahead. He responded simply and clearly, no. She followed the right process by contacting us. She looked crushed, realizing her threats held absolutely no legal weight. The officer explained briefly that requesting your own property back was not harassment under any law, and that she could have avoided all this by simply cooperating weeks ago. His tone was professional but firm, and I could tell he was unimpressed with her behavior throughout this situation. She tried to argue that I was aggressive in my messages, that I made her feel unsafe with my demands, but the officer cut her off politely but firmly. He said if she felt genuinely threatened, she should have called the police herself instead of making threats against me. The logic was simple and devastating to her narrative. She had no response to that, just stammered and looked at the ground. Her boyfriend shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly wanting this to be over. The officer wished us both a good day and walked back to his patrol car professionally. I thanked him quietly but sincerely, then got into my own car without looking back at her one final time. Driving away slowly, I felt a complicated mix of anger, closure, and disbelief at how far she pushed this simple situation. I did not get revenge in a dramatic way with public shamming or legal charges, just through clarity and documented facts. But seeing her facade crumble in front of authority was more satisfying than any confrontation could have been personally. The validation from the officer, the return of my belongings, the exposure of her lies in real time, it all added up to a quiet victory that felt more meaningful than yelling. I did not yell or insult her at any point. I did not make threats or stoop to her level. I just followed the process correctly and let the truth speak for itself objectively. That was more powerful than anything I could have said in anger or frustration. She tried to paint me as obsessive and harassing, but the law sided with me completely. She tried to keep what was not hers through intimidation, but documentation proved otherwise undeniably. She lost, not because I destroyed her reputation, but because she was simply wrong legally and morally. That felt like the truest form of justice possible. Back in my sublet that evening, I unpacked everything slowly and carefully, savoring each familiar item. The familiarity of my own things made the place feel less temporary and more like home. It was like I finally reclaimed a piece of my life she tried to hold onto and control. My coffee maker sat on the counter where it belonged, ready for tomorrow morning. My lamp lit up the corner of my room again with its familiar warm glow. My pots and pans filled the cabinet, ready to be used without frustration or borrowing from others. Each item was more than just an object with practical use. It was a symbol of my autonomy, my right to own what I paid for with my own money. The relief was profound and physical, like tension leaving my body finally. I made coffee in my own machine that night just to test it, and it tasted better than anything I had in weeks. Not because the coffee was actually different, but because it was mine again and no one could take it. I sat in my small space, surrounded by my belongings, and finally felt at peace with everything. The nightmare was over completely. In the weeks that followed, I cut ties completely with her, and most of our mutual friends who believed her story without question. Mutual friends eventually heard the real story about police involvement, and a few even apologized for believing her version without hearing mine. I did not chase justice or retaliation beyond getting my things back. I already got the only closure I needed, the moment she realized she could not take from me without consequences, legal or otherwise. Her narrative crumbled once people knew the police were involved and called it theft, once they understood it was not just a petty dispute but actual possession theft under law. Some friends quietly unfollowed her on social media when the truth came out. Others reached out to me privately, saying they always felt something was off about her version of events but did not want to get involved. I accepted their apologies graciously but kept my distance from that entire social circle moving forward. I did not need vindication from them or their approval. I just needed my belongings and my peace of mind back, nothing more. And I got both through proper channels. The experience taught me that standing up for yourself, even when everyone calls you dramatic or obsessive, is always worth it in the end. Because I was not overreacting to anything. I was right all along about everything, and the law proved it.